In 1984, a pharmacist in Akron, Ohio, stamped a prescription for Quaalude 300s and slid it across the counter without a second thought. The customer was a 34-year-old teacher. By the end of that year, those pills were reclassified as Schedule 1, the same category as heroin. That drug is number 25 on this list. Number 19 killed more than 100 people before anyone connected the dots. Number 4 was pulled after a single weekend of news reports. These 25 medicines were handed out like candy across the decade. They sat in cabinets from Akron to Sacramento. Doctors prescribed them. The FDA had approved every single one. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 25 medicines from the 1980s that are illegal now. Number 25. Quaalude. This was the pill that earned a nickname before it earned a warning label. Methaqualone hit American pharmacies in 1965 under the brand name Quaalude, and by the late 70s it was handed out for insomnia, anxiety, and muscle tension in strengths of 150 and 300 milligrams. A single lemon 714 cost about $4 on the street in 1981 and maybe $1 at the pharmacy counter. Doctors wrote 4 million prescriptions a year at the peak. The pills made you feel warm and loose, like someone had unplugged your worries. But the same drug that helped a tired grandmother sleep was the one a disco crowd chewed before midnight. In 1984, Congress moved methaqualone to Schedule 1, the hardest category in the Controlled Substances Act. Production ended. Doctors lost the right to prescribe it. Possession became a felony. The pill that used to sit in medicine cabinets in Akron and Sacramento became, overnight, as illegal as heroin. And the people who had been taking it for years were left to detox on couches across America with no help from the same system that had prescribed it in the first place. Number 24. Darvon and Darvocet. For 55 years, propoxyphene was the pain pill your grandmother kept in a pill box next to her reading glasses. Eli Lilly launched Darvon in 1957, added acetaminophen to make Darvocet in 1972, and by the 1980s, it was the 10th most prescribed drug in the United States. A typical refill ran about $12 in 1985. 23 million Americans filled a prescription for it in a single year. The pills were pink and white, small, easy to swallow. Old-timers took them for arthritis, for back pain, for the ache that came from 40 years on a factory floor. What nobody told those people was that propoxyphene was chemically related to methadone, and it built up in the heart muscle with every dose. Studies published later showed the pills caused fatal heart rhythm changes even at normal doses. The FDA finally pulled propoxyphene in November 2010. The agency estimated more than 1,000 Americans had died from it across the previous decade alone. A medicine your mother trusted was slowly stopping hearts in bedrooms from Cleveland to Phoenix, and nobody connected the dots for 50 years. Number 23. Oraflex. Eli Lilly rolled Oraflex out in April 1982 with the biggest marketing push the company had ever funded for an arthritis pill. Benoxaprofen was the active ingredient, and it was sold as a once-a-day miracle for people whose joints had gone stiff with age. The ads ran in magazines for retired teachers, for church bulletins, for senior center newsletters. A bottle cost about $48. By August of that same year, just 4 months later, Oraflex was gone. British regulators had already connected it to dozens of deaths from liver failure and kidney damage. The FDA pulled the drug after reports of jaundice in patients who looked healthy on Monday and were hospitalized by Friday. More than 60 people died in the United States alone. Lilly pleaded guilty in 1985 to withholding safety data from the FDA. The company paid a fine that would not have covered a single week of advertising. The old women who had filled those prescriptions in the spring of 1982 were told simply to stop taking the pills and throw the bottles away. No recall program, no follow-up. Just a quiet end to a drug that had been on shelves for the length of a summer. Number 22. Zomax. Johnson & Johnson brought Zomepirac to market in 1980 under the name Zomax, and for 3 years it was the painkiller doctors reached for when aspirin was not strong enough and codeine was too much. Dentists handed it out after root canals. Obstetricians sent mothers home with it after cesareans. The pill cost about 75 cents in 1982, cheap enough that insurance covered it without blinking. More than 15 million Americans took it in its first 3 years. Then the reports started coming in. Patients who had taken Zomax for weeks without issue would swallow one more tablet and collapse in anaphylactic shock. 14 people died before the pattern was clear. Johnson & Johnson pulled the drug in March 1983, claiming the decision was voluntary. A generation of dental patients and new mothers woke up to find their pain pill had been a loaded weapon all along. The bottles that had sat on kitchen counters across the country went into trash cans that weekend. Nobody was told to bring them back. Nobody was told what to watch for. The pill just disappeared, and the people who had trusted it were left to read about the deaths in the Sunday paper. Number 21. Meridol. Namifencine was a European antidepressant that arrived in American pharmacies in 1985 under the name Meridol. Doctors loved it because it lifted depression without the sedation that came with older pills. Housewives in Cleveland took it and felt like themselves again for the first time in years. A retired auto worker in Detroit described the relief as waking up from a 20-year nap. The pills cost about $32 for a month's supply. For roughly a year, Meridol was the rising star of American psychiatry. Then patients started showing up in emergency rooms with hemolytic anemia, a condition where the body's own immune system destroys red blood cells. Kidneys failed. People died without warning. The manufacturer pulled Meridol globally in January 1986, less than 12 months after it reached the United States. Doctors had to call their patients one by one to tell them the medicine that had transformed their lives was gone. Many of those patients would spend the rest of the decade cycling through older drugs with older side effects, trying to recreate a feeling that a brief, beautiful, and dangerous pill had given them. Number 20. Suprol. Suprofen, sold as Suprol, was another non-steroidal anti-inflammatory that looked like the future when it launched in late 1985. Doctors prescribed it for the same aches and stiffness that sent people to the cabinet for aspirin, but Suprol was billed as gentler on the stomach. A typical prescription ran about $50. In the first 8 months, nearly 250,000 Americans filled one. Then the reports arrived. Patients would take Suprol for a few days, feel fine, and then wake up with searing flank pain and blood in the urine. The drug was triggering acute kidney damage in otherwise healthy adults. The FDA pulled Suprol in May 1987. A grandmother in Toledo who had been using it for knee pain found her kidneys had been silently injured by a pill she took with breakfast. The recall arrived as a short newspaper paragraph on page 7. No warning letters went out. No doctor called anyone at home. The pills were simply gone from the shelves, and the patients who had taken them were left to find out through word of mouth what had been in the capsule they had trusted. Number 19. Celocrine. Tinoleic acid, sold in the United States as Celocrine, was a blood pressure pill that arrived on pharmacy counters in May 1979 and was still being refilled deep into the 80s because the warnings moved slowly. The drug helped the kidneys flush out excess salt and was cheaper than the older options. A bottle cost about $18. Retired postal workers and school teachers with high blood pressure took Celocrine every morning with their coffee. Within a year of launch, doctors began reporting cases of severe hepatitis in patients who had been perfectly healthy. 36 people died. More than 500 were hospitalized. The FDA pulled Celocrine in January 1980, but bottles remained in home medicine cabinets for years after, and prosecutors later showed the manufacturer had buried evidence of liver damage during the approval process. Executives pleaded guilty to federal charges in 1984. The families of the dead received settlements that would not have covered a year of lost wages. A pill for high blood pressure had destroyed the livers of people who had been told it was safer than the alternatives, and the system that was supposed to catch that had let it through. Number 18. Halcion High Dose. Triazolam, sold as Halcion, came to market in 1982 and quickly became the most prescribed sleeping pill in the world. At the 0.5 milligram strength, It knocked a person out fast and let them wake up without the grogginess of older sleep aids. A prescription cost around $26. Traveling salesmen took Halcion on red-eye flights. Anxious mothers took it on Sunday nights when Monday morning loomed. It worked. It was simple. It was cheap. Then the report started. People were waking up with no memory of the night before. Some had made phone calls, driven cars, even committed violent acts, and remembered nothing. British regulators banned Halcion outright in 1991. The FDA did not ban it, but pulled the 0.5 milligram strength off the American market and forced the labels to carry heavy warnings. Doctors in rural Ohio, who had handed out the higher dose for a decade, suddenly had to call patients in for a conversation about what they may or may not have done during the last 10 years of sleep. The pill that worked so well had been rewriting memories without anyone's permission. Number 17. Fenformin. Fenformin was a diabetes pill that had been around since 1957, but it was in the late 1970s and early 1980s that the damage finally came into focus. The FDA pulled its approval in November 1977, but stockpiles kept circulating for years, and the drug was still legally sold in some states into the early 1980s under compassionate use rules. Diabetic grandmothers in Iowa kept refilling it because it was what their doctors had always prescribed. A bottle cost about $9. The problem was lactic acidosis, a rare but nearly always fatal reaction where the body's chemistry tips into a crisis no emergency room could reverse. The drug killed an estimated 1 in every 1,000 users. For a medicine taken by 500,000 Americans, that math added up to a body count the country never properly counted. When the replacement drug, metformin, finally arrived in the United States in 1995, older diabetics who had survived Fenformin were amazed that a pill could manage their blood sugar without the dread. They had spent years wondering if the medicine or the disease would take them first. Number 16. Cylert. Pemeline, sold as Cylert, was a stimulant that parents of children with attention problems used from 1975 through the mid-80s as the go-to alternative to Rezulin. School nurses in suburbs from Dayton to Phoenix kept the orange bottles locked in metal cabinets next to the bandages. A month's supply ran about $45. Children took one pill with breakfast and sat through long division without squirming. For a while, Cylert looked like a gift. Then the livers started failing. Reports trickled in of kids, teenagers, and college students developing acute hepatic failure with no other cause. Some needed transplants. Some died. The FDA required warning labels in 1999 and finally pulled Cylert entirely in October 2005. Parents who had given their children that orange pill every morning for years had to read about the withdrawal in the evening news. The drug had done exactly what it promised. It had also quietly destroyed the livers of an unknown number of children whose parents would spend the rest of their lives wondering if the pill they trusted was the reason their child had trouble 15 years later. Number 15. Seldane. Terfenadine, sold as Seldane, was the first non-drowsy antihistamine and arrived on American shelves in 1985 like a miracle. Allergy sufferers who had spent decades choosing between sneezing fits and falling asleep at work suddenly had a pill that let them do both normally. A month's supply cost around $35. By 1990, Seldane was generating $1 billion a year in sales, and 30 million Americans had tried it. A tired schoolteacher in Akron could take one tablet with her breakfast coffee and get through a pollen-heavy afternoon without nodding off at her desk. Truck drivers kept a bottle in the glove compartment. Ad executives in Manhattan kept one in the desk drawer. For the first time in American pharmacy history, allergy season did not have to mean a blurred, drowsy, half-awake summer. The problem was hidden in the chemistry. When Seldane was taken with common antibiotics like erythromycin or antifungal drugs like ketoconazole, it caused a fatal heart rhythm called torsades de pointes. A dentist in Columbus could prescribe an antibiotic for a gum infection, never knowing his patient was already taking Seldane, and the combination could stop a heart in the middle of an afternoon. The FDA pulled Seldane in 1998 after more than 100 confirmed deaths and a mountain of ignored early warnings. A replacement called Allegra, which is really just the active metabolite of Seldane without the dangerous parent compound, quietly took its place on the shelf. The allergy pill that changed American seasons had been a heart attack waiting for the wrong prescription to join it in the same cabinet. And for 13 years, that was a weight the manufacturer had asked patients to make without telling them. A grandmother in Toledo on Seldane for ragweed and erythromycin for bronchitis was, without knowing it, playing a game no pharmacist had the information to stop. The pharmacies, the doctors, the patients, all of them had been kept one step behind a drug that was already killing people in the spring of 1985. Number 14. Hismanal. Astimazole, sold as Hismanal, launched in 1988 and was the second wave of the non-drowsy antihistamine story. Doctors liked it because a single pill lasted all day. A refill cost about $41 in 1990. Accountants who suffered through spring allergies, truck drivers who could not afford drowsy medicine, mothers who needed to drive carpools, they all made Hismanal their morning ritual. 20 million Americans took it across its lifetime. But Hismanal shared Seldane's terrible secret. It caused the same heart rhythm disturbance when combined with a handful of common drugs, and unlike Seldane, it stuck around in the body for weeks after the last dose. Even people who stopped taking it could die from an interaction that happened days later. The FDA pulled Hismanal in 1999. Patients who had been taking it for a decade were told, in a printed insert no one read, that the pill they trusted had been playing dice with their hearts the whole time. The era of taking allergy medicine without fear was over, at least until the next generation of drugs was invented that did not have a body count attached. Number 13. Propulsid. Cisapride, sold as Propulsid, was prescribed through the 90s for heartburn and slow digestion, but the drug had been approved in 1993 based on studies done in the 80s, and by the time it reached its peak, it was in the medicine cabinets of nearly 40 million Americans. A month's supply cost about $54. Janssen, the manufacturer, marketed it heavily to mothers of colicky infants and to older adults with what was vaguely called functional dyspepsia. The problem, as with so many pills on this list, was the heart. Propulsid caused long QT syndrome and sudden cardiac death, especially in patients taking it with erythromycin or grapefruit juice. At least 300 deaths were linked to it, including the deaths of more than 24 infants. The FDA restricted Propulsid in 2000 to a limited access program, effectively pulling it from retail pharmacies. Pediatricians in small-town clinics who had handed out samples to exhausted mothers were left to explain why the pill they had trusted was now available only through a special protocol. The parents whose babies had died got a settlement. The rest got a warning letter in the mail. Number 12. Encanide. Encanide, sold as Encade, was an anti-arrhythmia drug approved in 1986. Cardiologists prescribed it to patients who had survived a heart attack in the hope that controlling the occasional irregular heartbeat would keep them alive longer. A monthly supply cost about $89. Retired men in every suburb of America took it with their morning nitroglycerin and felt like the pill was holding their lives together. Then came the CAST trial, a landmark study that shocked American cardiology. Researchers found that patients on Encanide were actually more than twice as likely to die as patients on placebo. The drug was silencing the small flutters that reminded the heart to keep itself in rhythm, and without those flutters, the hearts were stopping altogether. The study was halted early in 1989 because the evidence was so overwhelming. Encanide was pulled from the market in 1991. A generation of heart attack survivors who had been faithfully taking a pill to save their lives were told, gently, that the pill had been shortening them. The trust between those patients and American medicine never fully recovered, and for good reason. Number 11. DES for daughters. Diethylstilbestrol, sold under more than 200 brand names, was a synthetic estrogen that doctors prescribed to pregnant women from 1941 through 1971 to prevent miscarriage. The FDA banned that use in 1971, but DES lingered in American pharmacies into the 80s for menopause, for livestock growth, and for what was called emergency contraception in college health centers. A prescription cost about $14. The tragedy was that the drug never actually prevented miscarriage. Worse, the daughters of the women who took it were developing rare vaginal cancers in their 20s, a condition almost unheard of before DES. More than 10,000 DES daughters came forward. Many were sterile, many had cancer. The drug that was supposed to save their mothers' pregnancies had reached into the next generation and stolen their health. By 1985, DES was effectively removed from American shelves for human use, but the damage was permanent, passed down the family tree like a photograph no one wanted to keep. The pill that a grandmother trusted had written itself into her daughter's body and her granddaughter's future. Number 10. Parlodel for lactation. Bromocriptine, sold as Parlodel, was handed to new mothers across the 1980s to suppress lactation if they chose not to breastfeed. A prescription cost about $22. Obstetricians in maternity wards wrote it by the thousands every month. For 10 years, it was simply what you took in the hospital on the way home with your baby. Then the reports began. Women, most of them young and healthy, were having strokes and heart attacks in the days after delivery while still holding their newborns in the living room. The FDA revoked Parlodel's approval for lactation suppression in 1994. Doctors were no longer allowed to prescribe it for that reason. A generation of mothers who had swallowed those pills at hospital discharge were left to wonder about the chest pains they had written off as anxiety, the migraines they had blamed on postpartum hormones. The drug that ended breast milk had sometimes ended lives. A simple pill, taken at one of the most vulnerable moments a woman ever has, had been quietly dangerous from the very first prescription. Number 9. Vioxx. Rofecoxib, sold as Vioxx, was approved in 1999, but its development stretched back through the 80s and it carried the fingerprints of a decade of NSAID failures like Oraflex and Zomax. Merck marketed it as a safer alternative for arthritis, and at its peak it was prescribed to 20 million Americans. A month's supply cost around $120. Retired plumbers in Akron took it for their knees. Librarians with carpal tunnel took it for their wrists. It worked, and for a few years it felt like the pain pill America had been waiting for. Then the data came out. Vioxx nearly doubled the risk of heart attack and stroke. An FDA reviewer estimated the drug had caused between 88,000 and 140,000 cases of serious heart disease before it was pulled in September 2004. Merck paid nearly $5 billion in settlements. The doctors who had handed out samples to grateful patients in the 90s had to call them one by one and explain that the pill that had eased their joints had also thickened the blood that fed their hearts. Number 8. PPA cold medicine. Phenylpropanolamine, known as PPA, was the active ingredient in almost every decongestant sold in American drugstores through the 80s and 90s. Dime Tap, Contact, Triaminic, Alka-Seltzer Plus, these were the brands every mother kept on the top shelf of the bathroom. A bottle cost about $7. A college student with a winter cold took it and kept studying. A retired mail carrier took it to get through flu season. 6 billion doses of PPA were sold annually at its peak. The drug caused hemorrhagic strokes in young women at rates that were impossible to ignore once a Yale study connected the dots. The FDA requested a voluntary withdrawal in November 2000, and drugstore shelves emptied overnight. Every cold and cough product in the American medicine cabinet had to be reformulated. Grandmothers in Phoenix who had given PPA syrup to their grandchildren for decades were stunned to learn that the red liquid they had trusted to cure a runny nose had been capable of ending a life. The replacement, pseudoephedrine, came with its own issues and eventually moved behind the pharmacy counter. Number 7. Fen-phen. The combination of fenfluramine and phentermine, known as Fen-phen, was the weight program of the 1990s, but its roots went back to Pondamin, which had been approved in 1973 and was quietly prescribed for weight control throughout the 80s. Doctors in Atlanta, in Dallas, in 100 smaller towns handed out fenfluramine prescriptions to patients who wanted to drop 30 pounds before a wedding. A month of pills cost about $96. At the craze's height, more than 6 million Americans were taking Fen-phen. Then, the reports arrived from the Mayo Clinic. Women in their 40s were developing heart valve damage that should not have existed outside of rheumatic fever cases from the 1940s. Primary pulmonary hypertension, a rare and usually fatal lung condition, was also turning up. Fenfluramine was pulled in September 1997. Thousands of women underwent open-heart surgery to repair or replace damaged valves. A simple pill prescribed for a simple reason had rewritten the hearts of women who had trusted their doctors, and the settlements that followed stretched into the billions and across decades of litigation. Number 6. Duract. Bromfenac, sold as Duract, was an anti-inflammatory pain pill approved in 1997 but modeled on the binoxaprofen and zomepirac chemistry of the early 1980s. It was meant for short-term pain, no more than 10 days, but doctors prescribed it like any other pill. A bottle cost about $62. Within 12 months, Duract had killed at least 4 patients from fulminant liver failure and put many more on transplant lists. Wyeth pulled the drug in June 1998. A dental patient in Columbus who had taken it for a week after oral surgery was in a hospital bed on a Thursday and gone by the following Monday. The families who buried loved ones from Duract received letters from the manufacturer offering sympathy and settlements. The pharmacists who had dispensed it sorted through what bottles remained on the shelves and threw the rest away. A pill that had been approved only a year before was suddenly as good as extinct, and the doctors who had prescribed it learned once again that the FDA's approval was not the end of the story, only the beginning. Number 5. Posicor. Mebofridil, sold as Posicor, was a blood pressure pill launched in 1997 after a decade of development that traced back to the late 1980s. Doctors liked it because it controlled hypertension without raising heart rate the way older options did. A bottle cost about $70. Within a year, Posicor had been prescribed to 200,000 Americans. Then, the problems emerged. Posicor interacted with more than 25 other common drugs, from statins to sedatives, and the interactions were deadly. A retired teacher in Toledo taking Posicor and Lipitor together could have a catastrophic drug reaction without warning. Roche pulled the drug in June 1998, only 12 months after launch. Doctors had to review every patient chart and call people at home to explain that their blood pressure pill had been quietly fighting with every other pill they were taking. A grandmother in Sacramento who had been using Posicor for her hypertension had also been taking a cholesterol pill, a mild antidepressant, and a thyroid medication, and the combination could have killed her at any moment through the whole spring of 1998. Number 4. Rezulin. Troglitazone, sold as Rezulin, was approved in March 1997 as a revolutionary new diabetes drug, but the research that supported it stretched back through the late 1980s. Parke-Davis had spent years testing it. A prescription cost about $140 a month. Doctors were excited because Rezulin represented a whole new class of medicine, and within a year it was being taken by 1 million Americans with type 2 diabetes. Then, the liver failures started. Patients who had been taking Rezulin for weeks or months were showing up in emergency rooms jaundiced and dying. The FDA warned about the liver risk in 1998, but left the drug on the market until March 2000, by which point at least 63 deaths had been confirmed and the real total was estimated far higher. A weekend of news reports about the deaths finally forced the withdrawal. A diabetic veteran in Phoenix who had taken Rezulin for his blood sugar died the week before the recall, and his family found out from the television. The pill had been pulled from American shelves after exactly that kind of weekend of news. Number 3. Baycol. Cerevastatin, sold as Baycol, was a cholesterol pill that launched in 1997 and was built on the statin research of the 80s. A month's supply cost about $88. Bayer marketed it as cheaper than Lipitor and just as effective, and by 2001, more than 700,000 Americans were taking it. The problem was a rare but devastating condition called rhabdomyolysis, where the body's muscle tissue breaks down and floods the kidneys with protein debris until they fail. Baycol was causing it at rates many times higher than other statins, especially when combined with a common cholesterol drug called gemfibrozil. At least 100 Americans died. Bayer pulled Baycol in August 2001. Retired steelworkers in Pittsburgh who had been taking it for their cholesterol found out through the newspaper. Doctors had to switch every patient to a different statin overnight. The pill that had been marketed as a money saver had, in dozens of cases, cost people everything. Bayer later paid more than $1 billion in settlements, but for the families of the dead, the check arrived long after the funeral was over. Number 2. Meridia. Sibutramine, sold as Meridia, was an appetite pill approved in 1997 but developed through the late 80s as a failed antidepressant. Abbott Laboratories launched it for weight control, and through the 2000s it became the go-to pill for people who wanted to drop 30 pounds without surgery. A month of Meridia cost about $130. 20 million prescriptions were filled worldwide. A secretary in Cleveland trying to fit into her daughter's wedding dress took one tablet every morning with orange juice. A retired bus driver in Phoenix took it to take pressure off his knees. Then the SCOUT trial, a long-term safety study, found that Meridia raised the risk of heart attack and stroke by 16% in patients already at cardiac risk. The FDA pulled Meridia in October 2010. The women who had lost 30 pounds on it had to learn that the cost of that weight loss had been paid in cardiac risk. The pharmacies that had stocked it received recall notices in the morning mail. A pill that had shaped a decade of American dieting became, in a single announcement, another entry in the graveyard of medicines that promised more than chemistry could safely deliver. Number 1. Bextra. Valdecoxib, sold as Bextra, was a cousin of Vioxx from the same family of anti-inflammatory pills that caught fire in the late 90s. Pfizer marketed it aggressively to arthritis patients and to post-surgical pain patients, and by 2004 more than 4 million Americans were taking it. A month of Bextra cost about $106. Retired factory workers in Akron, Ohio filled their prescriptions every 30 days alongside the Quaalude survivors, the Darvon survivors, the Vioxx survivors, all walking into the same pharmacy with different chapters of the same American story. Bextra was pulled in April 2005 after data showed it raised the risk of heart attack, stroke, and a rare life-threatening skin reaction called Stevens-Johnson syndrome. Pfizer eventually paid a $2.3 billion settlement, the largest healthcare fraud settlement in American history at that time. The pill that ended this list started in research labs during the same decade that gave us Quaalude and Oraflex, and it proved that even after 40 years of recalls and deaths and settlements, American medicine still had not learned the most important lesson. Approval is not the same as safety. Here is my challenge. Go find the pill bottles your parents saved in a kitchen drawer. Read the names on the labels. Look them up. You may find that the medicine that kept your grandfather going through his 60s was pulled from the market 5 years after he died. You may find that the pill your mother took for her headaches is now a cautionary tale in a medical textbook. These 25 medicines are not ancient history. They were handed out by the millions across a decade most Americans remember clearly. They sat in the same cabinets as aspirin and Tums. They were trusted by doctors, approved by the FDA, paid for by insurance, and every single one was eventually pulled, banned, or restricted because the evidence of harm became impossible to ignore. These are not just pills. They are proof that the medicine cabinet of the past was a riskier place than anyone realized, and that the faithful trust a generation of Americans placed in their pharmacies was, too often, a trust the system did not deserve. Share in the comments which of these your family took. I want to know if your mother remembers Seldane. I want to know if your father was on Darvon, because these are not just memories. They are the medicines that shaped a decade and the reckoning that followed.